Hello, welcome to Professional Development entitled Empowering Student Learning Using Lesson Level Learning Intentions and Success Criteria. My name is Heather Gary, and I teach at Landon Middle School. I developed this presentation in partnership with Dee Nicholas, who is also a teacher at Landon Middle School. And we're also both members of the CNA team, the Curriculum and Assessment team for ELA for the district. Our learning intentions for today, we're learning to collaboratively determine the learning progressions inherent in a particular standard in order to develop learning intentions and success criteria at the lesson level. What success looks like, we're going to analyze a particular standard, break it down into concepts and skills, determine the learning progressions needed to achieve mastery of the standard, determine how we will assess learning of the standard, and use the learning progressions we've identified to write learning intentions and success criteria. Often there's a temptation with educators, because we are so busy and our time is so limited, to want the quick fix or the ready-made answer, something that we can administer, because we always have boots on the ground. We always have students in front of us and we're trying to do the next right thing or the next best thing. But I would like to encourage you, with visible learning, the magic really happens in the process. And that process, as we've just outlined through success criteria, starts with analyzing a standard that you want to teach. And then it progresses into looking at what are the skills that students have to have in order to achieve mastery of that standard. And from there, once you've done that work, then it becomes clear what an authentic assessment to determine how well our students have learned what we've taught them would be. And assessments don't have to be long, they can be very short. Just a way to identify an exit slip, a couple of things on an exit slip, a few questions, just to determine how well students have learned what we've presented to what we have taught them so far. Okay. On this slide, Visible Learning, there is a link to an article that I recommend. It is called How to Empower Student Learning with Teacher Clarity. We recommend this article, but we know your time is limited, so if you don't feel like you have time to read an article at this time, I will give you a synopsis of it. Knowing what to teach and how to teach is tricky. We have our standards for our content area, and they're written as desired outcomes. Often, those desired outcomes won't be achieved until the end of a year, or certainly the end of a unit. They're time consuming and they're complex. And then we add to the mix that we're serving the needs of a diverse group of learners. That is also difficult. What John Hattie says is that with everything that educators are faced with now, we need clarity in order to help us achieve what we most want to achieve. And this is how John Hattie defines teacher clarity. It's a deep understanding about what to teach and why, how to teach it, and what success looks like. It's taking a process that previously was somewhat invisible to students. Teachers knew what they were trying to get across, where they were going, but that process of how we get from this point to that point wasn't made visible to students. So by making it visible to students, that gives them an opportunity to track their own learning, to assess how well they're doing with their learning, to empower them to become owners of their own learning and responsible for their learning. And it changes us from the purveyors of knowledge that we impart to students into facilitating the student's own learning. This process enables teachers to clearly communicate learning and success to students in plain, easy to understand language. And teacher clarity has been proven to lead to better feedback for students, better and more authentic assessments, and it helps focus instruction on the most important standards. With visible learning, every student has the same learning intention and success criteria, but how students show their learning can look very different from others. The process enables choices and differentiation. Learning progressions are defined by Larry Ainsworth as sequential building blocks of instruction, or instructional scaffolds that students use to work their way up to the learning intention. So, as teachers, when we talk about learning progressions, we start with a standard, and that standard is the desired outcome. And then we take it apart and we're going to analyze it into what that standard is actually asking of students. We take it apart and put it into concepts and skills, and then think about and collaboratively discuss what that standard is asking. Then we think about the requisite skills that students need in order to achieve mastery of that standard. What do they need to know in order to be able to show that they've learned that particular standard? Learning progressions are the essential core concepts and processes that underlie a standard. Learning progressions can be thought of as the daily chunks of instruction. Standards are the desired outcome that students will achieve, but most standards, as we said before, can't be learned in a single day. Instead, they represent the knowledge gained through extended experience and interaction with the content. And that comes from Teacher Clarity Playbook Module 2. If you think of learning progressions as rungs on a ladder, at the top of the ladder we have mastery of the standard, and the rungs provide the method to get to that mastery. Learning progressions can be used to develop assessments of mastery so we can determine how a student's progressing through a standard. This is what I think challenges a lot of teachers. There's no right number of learning progressions, and there's no right number of learning intentions. There needs to be enough learning progressions to support the student's learning. That can challenge teachers and make them feel like they don't know what to do. But I'd like to flip at your perspective and show you that this is wonderful that it allows for this flexibility, because we can then make this about our students that are in front of us right now. Learning progressions are going to look very different, for example, in an AP class than they are in a resource room. It depends on where our students are. So, when you think of it that way, we're tailoring education to the needs of our students. And that is going to have a lot better effect, and they're going to and make them more successful. I have links here for some progressions documents for different content areas. I have one for math, English language arts, science, and social studies. These are just examples to give you some ideas, work that's already been done from different districts on learning progressions, and they've published it. I'm going to click on the ELA link right now. That's my content area, so that's what I'm most familiar with. And if you happen to be an ELA teacher as well, this will help you. But to find the learning progressions on this link, you're going to go down, all the way down to where you get to reading, literature, reading informational text, writing, and speaking and listening. These are the 4 strands we have in English language arts. They've done the work here of unpacking the standards. This is the state of Delaware, by the way. So if you are interested in a different content area, they've done the work for all the content areas, and you could find that information through this site as well. Just to take one look at a particular standard in English language arts, the standard is listed here, CCR. Read closely to determine what the text says explicitly and make logical inferences from it. Cite specific text evidence when writing or speaking to support conclusions drawn from the text. It has the vertical alignment in grade 5. This is what the standard said. Grade 6 is in bold to show us that's where we are now. And grade 7 will be how in the future, students need to be able to address that standard. Here are the learning progressions. They have taken it down to the skills that students need to have and be able to do in order to achieve mastery of that standard. So that's an example. Standard of statements for teachers to identify what students should know, be able to know, and do. Effective teachers start with a standard to identify the content and the skills. They then identify the learning progressions that are required to meet that standard. Next, they break the learning progressions into lesson-sized chunks and phrase those chunks so that students will understand them. Each one of these chunked phrases is a learning intention. Our plan today was to model this process for you, but through a series of technological glitches, unfortunately, Dee is not able to be with us, so I will do the best I can to show you an example of how we went through this process together using a particular standard to write a lesson. That will be coming up. Learning progressions, this is another um, idea for us that learning and progressions help us frame and develop the assessment. We develop the learning intentions after learning progressions, and success criteria can be written using the learning progressions we've identified. Here is a link to the lesson progression template. This comes out of the Teacher Clarity Playbook. This is the work that I was talking about earlier, that it's very important to do this work. If you can do it with a grade level partner or in a PLC, that is ideal. If you need to do it on your own, it is still very worthwhile to go through the process of taking apart a standard, pulling it out and saying, looking at what it is actually asking students to do, taking it apart into concepts, which are nouns, and skills, which are verbs. And then after you've really deeply thought about the standard and what it's truly asking, then think about what do students have to know to be able to achieve this standard. Just to give you an example, Dee and I took the standard reading informational text 6.5 to model this. The standard reads, analyze how a particular sentence, paragraph, chapter, or section fits the overall structure of a text and contributes to the development of ideas. We identified the concepts in that standard, which are nouns, as sentence, chapter, section, structure, text, and ideas. We identified the skills, the verbs, as analyze, and contribute. Okay. So now that we've done that work and we've talked that out, we have a better understanding of what that particular standard is asking students to do. So from there, we identified learning progressions. What do students have to know in order to achieve mastery of that standard? So for this standard, we identified students have to know text features. They have to be able to identify text features, know why they're there, what the purpose of them is, and how those features help support their understanding of the text. We determined that our students are secure in that knowledge at this time. We've given them, they've learned this in previous grades, and we have reinforced it at our grade level this year. And we know through observation, through assignments, and through listening in on collaborative discussions between students that they get this and they're using them. So we don't have to have that be part of our success criteria, but we still identified it as a learning progression. Then we determined that students would need to know characteristics of the 5 common types of text structure. And those would be compare and contrast, description, problem solution, cause and effect, and sequence. Collaboratively, we determined that our students have a very good and solid understanding of sequential text. They have a very good, solid understanding of descriptive text. They're not as secure in problem solution, cause and effect, or compare and contrast. So, in order to support their understanding of that, we determined that we would give them short text with graphic organizers in order to model for them how we, as learners, determine the text structure and find the signal words and the questions that it answers to help us determine what the text structure is, and then we will guide them through practice in doing that themselves. So that another one of our learning progressions, things that students have to know in order to achieve mastery of this standard, is they need to be able to determine why an author would choose a particular text structure. They need to be able to understand the characteristics of each type and then understand why an author would choose compare and contrast over problem and solution, or why they would choose sequential rather than cause and effect. So we're going to support their understanding of that through modeling and an explicit instruction and through guided practice. So our learning progressions were students can identify text features, the purpose of them, and why they need to know them in informational text, why they need to use them. They need to be able to understand text structure, what it is, and why authors use it. They need to be able to understand the common types, the most common types, which we identified as sequential, cause and effect, compare and contrast, descriptive. I think I might have forgotten one. It seems like there should be another one. And so now we're going to take the learning progressions that we've identified, and we're going to apply that to the lesson that we have. Our next text is Mammoth Shakes and Monster Waves. And so as we're reading through that, we're going to think about how we're going to assess their knowledge of this standard and where they are with these learning progressions. And as we do that, our learning intentions are going to become clear, where we need to start based on our knowledge of students and our knowledge of the standard and the curriculum. And then we're going to be able to think through how we're going to assess it. So, what Dee and I determined was that we can assess their knowledge of this standard by asking them to reread a section of Mammoth Waves and Monster Shakes. I'm sorry, Monster Waves and Mammoth Shakes, and to identify what the text structure is that the author used by identifying several causes and effects, and then asking them the question, why did the author choose this text structure and not problem solution? We feel like that will give us an understanding of their knowledge of text structure and why an author chooses that, and how a particular section is going to contribute to the development of ideas. So that is the process we went through to do this. Okay, now we have a video that we've linked. It's 7 minutes and 4 seconds. We'd like you to pause this recording and watch the video. And then when you return, we have a few reflective questions for you after you've watched the video. There's the video. Welcome back. The questions over the video are: how will student knowledge of the pathway of learning success criteria help increase engagement? And how does success criteria help transfer ownership of learning to the student? If you would please, we do have a Pear Deck interactive slide here. You could put your answers and then we'll be able to view them. Or if you'd like, if you're watching with a colleague, have a discussion over it. That's a valuable learning experience. Okay, this is taken from the Teacher Clarity Playbook, Module 2. Some of you may be familiar with it, but it gives a great graphic of what we've been talking about. The standard is the intent, it's the desired outcome. And what we want is for students to be able to achieve mastery of that standard. And so to do this, it requires us to plan backwards. We need to start with the end in mind. What is the goal? How are we going to assess what we want students to learn? And from there, we can then figure out what skills students need in order to achieve that. And that pathway that we're going to identify together with our colleagues in PLCs or as we plan is going to lead to learning intentions. The learning progressions, what they do is they articulate the pathway to proficiency. The standards provide the scope and the sequence of the particular curricular area that shows how learning intentions are broadly developed and the desired outcome. Learning intentions are a statement of what students will learn from a lesson. And then success criteria help students monitor their own learning. They can now determine where they are at in that progression. And that helps them articulate what they're learning and how well they're learning it. And it helps them be able to know how to ask for help. It is empowering students as learners. This is pretty exciting stuff and impactful. Success criteria taps into principles of human motivation, and it taps into the desire that humans have to succeed. If there is cognitive dissonance, if there's a distance between where they are and where they should be, they're going to want to close that gap. It gives them the motivation to close that gap. So by giving them success criteria, we're giving them a path to go down, and we're giving them motivation to go down it. Assessments are going to be driven by the learning progressions and the work that we've done together as teachers collaboratively. And it's going to give us more authentic assessments, and that will give us a truer and deeper knowledge and understanding of what our students know and what they're able to do. Okay, we've talked about this, but I want to give you some more about what success criteria is and why it's important. Students need to understand the what and the why of the assessment or the task. It is a good idea to give them a rubric in the beginning before they've done the assignment or they've had the learning. Knowing how they're going to be assessed on it can help them tune in to the important parts. This is a real world skill too. When we go to get a driver's license, they give us the book with all the rules and all the answers in it. It's up to us to study it and learn it and apply that knowledge to our ability to drive. Another important students can build their muscles of perseverance and revise their task or work because they are motivated now to meet and match that success criteria. Students understand the expectations of learning rather than just doing an assignment to be graded. Students see what success looks like not just through success criteria, but also by being given mentor texts, exemplars, real world examples, teacher modeling, small group, student roles, peer modeling. This is a template that we found for a lesson on visible learning. If you choose to use it, And if you don't, it's something good to look at right now. This is a checklist to start with the learning. Well, this just gives a place to outline what the learning intention will be, what the success criteria will be, the hook, sometimes called the anticipatory set, the presentation, what that's going to look like. It's going to include input, it will include modeling, it will include checking for understanding, it will include guided practice, and then there will be closure. And then independent practice is what students do after this whole process has been taken place. This is a quote that we liked. A learning environment should support student explorations, errors, success, and provide interactions with more capable peers. Some people get worried about learning intentions are going to rob students of the inquiry that they could in certain content levels. It's in content areas, it's certainly a concern. But we wanted to let you know that learning intentions can be written in a way that you're not going to give the outcome. So, also, you can conceivably do a learning intention a little bit later on in a lesson. The point is always that we are really intentionally working out what we want to teach students. We're working out what students have to know in order to achieve mastery of that standard. And then those are our learning progressions. And then we're developing ways to assess them that are authentic and will allow them to demonstrate that mastery, providing choice within that as often as we can. And that all is leading to a better understanding and it's a more engaged learner. Hattie has 10 mind frames that he identifies as part of a visible learning school system or educator. We just want to look at one right now. One of the mind frames that he is, as educators, we believe we are change agents. We see ourselves as change agents and we're enablers, not barriers. It's important that we think about how to raise the self esteem of our kids and make them secure learners. Because think of the impact that will have on our school and our community. We need to be flexible in regards to different cultural groups in our school community and the diversity of those groups. We have another video linked here for you. It is a student led discussion and it models for you a fishbowl discussion. And we hope it's inspiring and something that you could think about doing with your students in your classroom. Here's some more ideas that come from the Visible Learning book on it's particularly the one that's content literacy. However, I think most of these examples could be used in any class, except for maybe book clubs and literacy circles. Maybe not so much in science, but table talks are certainly something that could be done, and fishbowl discussions and gallery walks. And there are examples there of book clubs and literacy. Perhaps you could draw inspiration from that in any content. And so, our last, before we leave, we'd like to ask you a question. This is also a Pear Deck slide. If you would like to click on that, and we'll be able to see your answers. But if you want to simply just discuss with a colleague or someone nearby, that would be great too. On a scale from 1 to 10, how do you feel about creating your step by step micro progression, student friendly success criteria? And how can you use what you've learned today in PLCs? Just want to encourage you that visible learning is a process. It's a very worthwhile process to start from the standard, break it down, unpack it together, then identify what students have to know in order to achieve mastery of that standard, and then from there, use that to develop the learning intention at the lesson level and develop the success criteria for that particular lesson. And then out of that, you can develop short, formative assessments that are authentic and that will really help you know where your students are at in the process of learning. We thank you for your time and attention today. We do hope this was valuable and useful for you. Please let us know if you have any questions or would like any further information. Dee and I are both in the district, so you just can put our names into Gmail and be able to contact us that way. And I hope you have a wonderful journey with visible learning. Thank you.